Well, good evening. It is a real pleasure for me to be here, and there's no audience I cherish more than our young people. I think, and I can certainly speak to it, there are nothing but challenges, and where there are challenges, there are opportunities in this world right now. And I'd like to address a few of those. Most important, and I'll spend 20 minutes or so talking, try to limit it to that, and then really open it up to what's on your mind, because that's educational to me, and hopefully in the questions that you ask, I'll be able to at least possibly broaden your perspective a little bit as well. When I recognize I was coming up the steps, or coming, I guess, down in the elevator, and I turned to one of your classmates and said, "So what's hot in leadership?" And she goes, "You." I'm not sure that's very helpful in terms of what you want me to say, but I do understand it. Just sort of some quick thoughts, though. One is 17 when I left LA, having been out of the state one time in my life. Got on a plane, went to Annapolis, Maryland with the Naval Academy, and literally never looked back. And principally never looked back because of the people that I met from across our land. And back in those days, we weren't global. In fact, I'm not sure what we weren't even national back then. We were local in 1964 when that occurred. And it's, in that regard, it opened up the world to me in ways that I just had no idea existed. But most importantly, I can remember the 24 or so then young men who lined up on the wall there that first day, and that I went through four years with, that many of them I still see today. Great people from all over our country, and I would expand that now to say great people from all over the world. Exciting, and it just opened up new horizons for me that I didn't know existed. And then when I graduated right, and this is a little bit intended to be a little bit informative about who I am and what drives me these days, but I graduated in '68, right into the Vietnam War. So I'm what I call a Vietnam baby. I was here for the social revolution, if you will, in the 60s and 70s, and it was a hard time. And we were going through an awful lot of things that I remember well, and not the least of which we came very close, some would even argue we broke our military. And we principally broke it because the military and the people of the country were pulled apart. But what the Navy offered me way back when, and I'd never been, my dad wasn't in the military, it offered me an opportunity to see the world. Most importantly, it offered me an opportunity to lead when I was young, thrown in with a bunch of young enlisted sailors in very challenging environments, straight to war, to fight in that war, to places in Japan and in the Philippines and Hong Kong, parts of the world that I had hardly even read about. Most importantly, it gave me an awful lot of responsibility from a leadership perspective when I was young, and the Navy kept feeding me into these positions throughout my entire life. One, around great people. Two, making a difference in places and areas that I had only dreamed of being a part of. And three, continuing responsibility. And in the Navy, you grow up, and actually in all the services you do this, you grow up and you command, and that is the pinnacle as you come up to lead organizations and you do what we do, staff work, but most of all, you lead. And fundamental, which is why when Michael mentions that story, fundamental to the joy and the challenge of it has been accountability. So it goes back to this 10-week course I took at Harvard, which in 1991, average age is 46, I'm 46 at the time, 144 people in the class, 72 U.S., 72 from countries around the world, and taught by, and we're living, and it was taught in modules, and I'll try not to say Harvard too many times here at Penn, but taught by a guy named John John Cotter, it was essentially a leadership module. And it wasn't until week 7 that somebody even mentioned accountability. And this was a time coming out of the 80s where, you know, everybody had made their dime, and I'm with CEOs of small companies or senior executive vice presidents of big ones from industries around the world. And I didn't understand that, because that's what leadership is all about to me. It is about understanding accountability and being held to an accountability standard, and at the same time holding yourself accountable. So in the middle of the crisis that we're in right now, there was a cartoon the other day that I saw, the financial crisis, and I'm not a financial expert, so but I'm paying attention to this. There was a cartoon the other day that had, and some of you may have seen this, that basically had a levee around Wall Street up in New York City, and then the rest of the cartoon was which was the lower 48. The rest of the lower 48 was the lower 9th Ward. And I thought that captured a lot of, in terms of where this is focused, and the question comes out of that is who's accountable, and who is accountable for all of this. And I would argue leaders are, whoever they might be, and it gets at what does that mean. So I started a very active discussion way back when in 1990 about that. Focused on the overall topic that Cotter was teaching us was change, how to lead in a time of change. And that's, if I were going to say one thing you're going to do, is you're going to lead in a time of change. It is never going to stop changing. That's our world, whether it's business, whatever we're in, and leading in a time of change is particularly difficult because it's incredibly threatening to status quo. It's also very exciting, and to stay with it and to continue to adapt is really important. And I can go through lots of examples, and we're doing that right now at an enormously challenging time with respect to the military, the Department of Defense, and the challenges that we have. And so I'll come back to sort of the specifics of leadership. Actually, I was handed a book on the way up. I think it's called Billion Dollar Lessons or $1 Billion Failures, but it's sort of what's happened in the last 25 years by monumental failures in business, $1 billion at a time, and the lessons that are learned from that. And one of the things, and I actually spent a little time with Mr. Chuka, who was one of the co-authors, and talked to him about this. And a couple of things and I've expanded my horizons, certainly in the last 10 to 15 years. And one of the things I've had to do as a leader, actually become as a senior leader in particular, but it applies to everybody, is you've got to grow. If you're just, matter of fact, a friend of mine said, you know, if you're not growing, you're dead. You're just sitting there. And so the growth requirement, and what does that mean, and how do you stimulate that, and how do you reach for the right kind of growth, and looking outside where you are and who you are and how other people do things, so that you can incorporate best practices and those kinds of views as well. So that the lessons, and I didn't look at the book, but what that book will do is it'll talk about failure. And in my career, first of all, I had no expectation. I didn't have an expectation to stay in the Navy more than 5 years, because that was my obligation when I graduated from the Naval Academy. And then I was going to stay for 10, and then I was going to stay for 20, because you could retire with a pension then, and here it is over 40. So obviously I didn't have that right. I had no expectation I'd ever lead the Navy. I loved command at sea. I loved the responsibility. I loved the accountability, and I loved going all over the world and making a difference. But I had, I was ready to go at about 20 or 21 years, and you just never know which train's going to run over you and say, hey, we want you on this one. So one of the messages is it's tied to growth, it's tied to not burning bridges, it's tied to broadness, not specificity, to keep options open, because you just never know what's gonna happen. And in those times, I have learned more from when I failed than from when I've succeeded. And there are a couple factors in that. Now, I'm not, one of the things that this book says, at least it says in the summary, is basically it's individuals with, or it's leaders that don't have a strategy. And that is fundamentally why you fail. And strategy is pretty hard stuff. We grow up at the tactical level. We grow up with individual skills. Getting above that to get to sort of the strategic level, and I assume you're studying some of that, isn't easy. It's not easy to stay there, but it is absolutely vital. So I'm not arguing in leadership that your strategy should, because I've learned so much in failure, your strategy would be see how often you can fail and how much I can learn. It isn't that at all. But we're all human. You don't get it right. And you work hard to move in the right direction. And then when you fail, it isn't, quite frankly, that you fail. It's can you get up, dust yourself off, and get moving again? And do you have the reputation? Do you have the depth? Do you have the mentorship? Do you have leaders around you who see enough within you to be able to ensure that you learn the lessons and then move forward? So again, and I've failed big time publicly in front of large groups of people. And interestingly enough, in one of the really big ones. One was when I was very young in command. I was 26 years old. I had my own ship, 100 sailors, and I was deployed. And I had a couple basically taken my own ship across the Atlantic and into the Mediterranean in the early 70s. It was something that just was remarkably challenging and fulfilling in many ways. But in the challenging, you know, I managed to fail and get, in our system, we have evaluations. Well, the evaluation, and actually even now, the belief is if you fail and if you get one of these evaluations that what I would call an F in the A to F class or school aspect of it, I got an F, from which I and others thought I could never recover. So that's when I was young. One of the things I learned is that the Navy in particular, which is the part of the military I was in, was it rewarded persistence, and I'm a pretty persistent guy. And when I go after something, when I go after a goal, it took me 7 years and 7 to 11 years to come back and basically start to be competitive again. High risk personal strategy, but it also is representative of some of the values that I found to be particularly helpful in the Navy at the time. And then another time, but that was a ship and a command that wasn't in good shape. And actually it turns out it's a whole lot easier to take command of an organization that is not in good shape and improve it than it is to take command of an organization that's at the top and move it up. And I've had people strategize, I don't want to take that second one, it's too hard. And the second one, in fact, and I didn't recognize that, the second one where I failed, I was much more senior, was the best ship in the fleet. It was the one everybody watched, and then I basically did a belly flop in front of the entire Atlantic fleet. And there were those that kind of went, yeah, you know, cheered in that regard. But I had a boss who saw something, said, well, I had a couple bosses that saw, well, there might be something here, and that allowed me to not get terminated by the Navy, essentially, and to be able to continue to serve. So the failure piece is important, and again, I'm not advocating failure, but it does happen, and it's important that we learn. Part of my growth in the last few years has to do with spent a lot of time in business classes and looking at how world-class organizations do certain things. And one of the things I've learned, it's always been the case, but it's become very evident, it's always been the case, is how do you pick how do you pick good people? How do you know someone's going to succeed in an assignment? And it is a daunting task. And as particularly in these I've been a senior, an admiral since 1995. So in these last 13 years, the growth requirements, the hardest thing I do and get right is pick good people. The reason I talk about the business piece of this is I did a case study at a senior executive business leadership course that the Navy participated in with both on the military and on the civilian side with civilian business leaders. And the case study we looked at was how to pick a CEO. And what struck me was that the average time in positions, in CEO positions for the last, whatever the analysis was, with a goal of 8 years, notion of 8 to 9 years, was 2.7 years. and the extraordinary efforts that people go into to pick these people. And so what does all that mean? It means it's hard, and so I would just suggest to you that spending time in that regard is also really, really important, and understanding it. Also, leadership is only, in my view, in the world we're living in, is only, you're only going to be better if you're willing to work hard. It's not, whoever you are, whatever your talents are, there's a lot of, we all have a certain amount of natural talent, but it is not just the what you show up with piece. In great part, it's how hard you're willing to work, and that is probably more than anything else underpinned with how you handle people, what you know about people. There's not an organization in the world that's doing well or wants to do that doesn't depend on great people. So it's not. So one of the reasons I am endeared to opportunities like this to come up and talk about this, because you are the future. And I know you're young, but it happens pretty quick. And what you're learning here and where you're headed, and the importance of it, and importance of you in positions of responsibility in our country, in our nation, in our world, wherever you're from. I can't overstate how critical that is. You are what we will be in the future. So reaching, stretching yourself, understanding the business, working hard, and then making sure you take care of each other, making sure you take care of the people who you care about and who are, in fact, your responsibility in leadership positions. Some of the things that I think about: you got to be true to yourself. You got to be able to, to get up in the morning, look yourself in the mirror, and be able to live with yourself. The issue of integrity, the issue of your word, the issue of how you treat people, the issue of walking the walk, not just talking, and being the example, and being part of a team, which goes back to what I said earlier. What I found very early in the Navy was the team, the responsibility, the direction that we had and were constantly given by really good leaders when I had. And I stayed in the Navy, quite frankly, because I had good leaders above me. And I can't tell you the number of young officers who've left that didn't do that didn't stay because their first leader, their first commanding officer didn't match up. And they said, young people say, that's it, that's this organization. I'm not going to do that again. That was not fun. And they move on. And yet, you also need to be able to figure out how you handle a variety of leaders, because there are a variety, and there are easy ones, there are tough ones, there are ones you match up well with, there are others that you don't match up with at all. And over the course of your life, you're going to have them all, unless you're going to go somewhere all by yourself. That's kind of how we grow up. So what are you? So what and how what are you going to do, and how are you going to handle that when you get into a really, really tough situation? The other thing, as a leader, that I cherish is somebody that will tell me that the emperor has no clothes. Now, very senior guy, I recognize my position. One of the things that when you make admiral, when you get selected for a position like this, back in 1995, you get a letter from each of the other 250 admirals that are in the Navy, and they say congratulations and all those things. And there was one sentence in one of those letters that I will never forget. After the congratulations, and he said, "Just remember one thing: from now on, you will always eat well, and you will never hear the truth again." Okay, and I can tell you, wherever I go, it's led with food. In this country, and actually, we're going to leave. We're going to leave here, and we're going to go eat, as an example. But it's the second piece, because everybody wants the boss to smile, everybody wants the boss to be happy, and for me, it's like, gee, we hope you've forgotten all the hard problems that you had to work on when you were coming up through this organization, and that life is grand. So how do you find out And this is a problem or a challenge for any leader. How do you find out what's really going on? And the more senior you become, the more distant you get removed from what's really going on. So flatter, faster, more agile, more flexible organizations, capabilities, systems, whatever it is. And then how do you integrate the people into this at a time when everything is moving so quickly? I sat in a meeting today just specifically on something called cyber warfare. You might call it sophisticated hackers or even unsophisticated hackers. Very serious challenge for us in the Department of Defense. Actually, it's a serious challenge for us in the country. And it is a whole domain that few people really understand, that a lot of us are going to have to understand a whole lot better. And probably the one part of the discussion that we have, and I'm talking from the leadership perspective, because it's hard to get leaders, old guys like me, to understand what's going on the internet. But the one thing I took a bunch out, but one important piece is, how do we move at the speed of light? Because that's kind of where we are on this. And if we don't move at the speed of light, somebody else is. And I'm being disadvantaged. And in my business, being disadvantaged is not what I seek. And nor would I hope that you would want me to seek. Being number 2 in the business I'm in is not a great outcome. So this is a whole new world. This is a whole new world that leaders, again, who didn't grow up through it, have to have reach some level of understanding that there's a whole lot going on in that domain, and how do I pick the right people and then take the right steps when I'm moving so fast and when the world's moving so fast. And it's not just, and this is I can just see it, this is a wonderfully international audience. It isn't just about what's going on in the United States. It is what's going on in the world. And one of the big adjustments right now, and I'll talk briefly about sort of 3 priorities, and then I'll open it up to questions. But where I spend, back to the strategy piece. So I come into this job and I say, work pretty hard actually over a couple of months to say, what are the big pieces? One is the military strategy. I'm the military guy. I'm not the policy guy. I'm not the civilian leadership of the country. I'm the military guy. So my lane is military strategy. So the military strategy for the broader Middle East, and that's from what I call Beirut to Tehran, and certainly includes Afghanistan and Pakistan. And the most challenging part of the world right now, the most unstable part of the world, and a part of the world that the entire world is not just dealing with now, but will have to deal with for the foreseeable future. So what does that mean? And from the strategic standpoint, so what is your approach with respect to Iran? What is it with Syria, who's tied directly into what's going on and has been and will be for the foreseeable future into Lebanon? What about the Al-Qaeda network? What about the Iranian network? You got Iran, the nation state, and you've got Iran, the state that supports terrorist activities and reaches to Lebanon and reaches into Hamas and is tied in a network. In one way Iran is a state, another way Iran is a network. At a time where networks are becoming more and more potent and more and more, there are many more of them. Obviously included in that is we're fighting 2 wars right now. We've been in Iraq, and it has gotten a whole lot better, and I've been there a bunch of times and would just verify that for you. And I first started going there in 2004. And then Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, the violence level is up, the poppy crop is up, the safe haven in Pakistan is getting safer. The governmental challenges in Afghanistan are huge. And one of the lessons that from the leadership perspective that I have learned is it is vital. And this goes back to when I was young. I just didn't understand it as well as I do now. Is I've got to look at these problems through the eyes of the people that live there. This is not going to be solved with an American view. So how do I see a set of problems that impact so heavily in a certain area or in a certain way, how do I see it through other people's eyes? And the only way I can do that is to be there and to listen and to understand and become much more educated. So my growth, even in this job, is in great part tied to that. I've been to Pakistan 6 times, actually 5 times since February. They're in their 3rd government since February. It is a state that is in incredible, in which the challenges right now are incredible, not just the insurgency aspect of it, and they've lost some 600 citizens in the last 3 years to suicide bombers, but their economy is not going well either. I mean, the price of fuel, the price of oil, the price of food, all those things that are affecting lots of countries worldwide is a big part of this as well. And in the end, all this security stuff, the military stuff that we're involved in, it's about creating a stable environment in which stable economies can start to thrive. Money is fleeing from Pakistan. Money is fleeing right now from Russia, as examples. To create a stable environment in which an economy can thrive, and this is tied to, for me, sitting down with parents all over the world whose #1 goal is to live in peace and to raise their kids to a higher standard of living. So the military security aspect of it is not just military, because security is tied to other parts of our government and non-government organizations in ways that we haven't thought of. But how do you create a secure environment, let people live where they want to live, who understand their own country, their own villages, their own tribes, in areas that we don't, and then have them start to flourish and take care of themselves, including provide for their own security. So that part of the world, the Middle East, is one. 2 is, so that's priority 1, get that right, and then how to address it from a strategy standpoint, the military strategy, that's 1. Secondly is what I call the health of our force. We're in our 6+ year of war. We are deploying, and this goes back to my time in Vietnam, and our concepts are different, but the pace of our deployments, we're overseas now, our Army is overseas for a year or 15 months. They're on their 3rd or 4th deployments at this pace. The families are brittle. We've got an awful lot of families challenged with engagement with their kids. Basically the time home is equal to the time deployed. And we've never done this before, at this pace, for this long, and in very, very tough combat. And in situations that, in fact, in the face of this war, and it is really important that all of us know this, the face of this war are those almost 5,000 young people who haven't come home, and their families who have signed up willingly. You know, this is a volunteer force, willingly done what our country has asked them to do, paid the ultimate price, and that we need to make sure we reach out and take care of them. So I do spend time with those families, and I do spend time at Arlington in Section 60, and I do meet those caskets that are coming back and arrive just down the road from here at Dover, and lots of others do as well, to be reminded of what we are asking our young people to do. And again, I go back to 1968, the best, most capable, most inspirational group of young people I have ever been around is the military that we have right now. Truly extraordinary Americans from all over the world, and actually from many countries who want to become citizens as well, who've paid the ultimate sacrifice, and some 20 to 30,000 who've been injured and whose lives have been altered forever. And if you walked into a room at Walter Reed or out at the Burns Center at San Antonio there, you would be inspired by them and their families, and essentially their willingness and their desire to get back, and their views haven't changed. They still want the American dream. They want to have a family. They want to raise kids. They want an education. They want their kids to have an education, and they want to be employed. The path achieving that American dream is getting a little tough. Is changed, but again, they are inspirational, and I believe we as a country owe them that opportunity, and that for communities throughout the land to reach out to these young people who've given so much and sacrificed so much and changed so much at a time, again, of rapid change, that we as a country need to meet their needs to include sort of that American dream piece. So the health of the forest issue, the forest is incredibly resilient, but we can't keep doing this for another 6 years at this pace. So we just started coming down, forces in Iraq. We will, I'm hopeful we will continue to do that, conditions permitting. We're going to have to send more forces to Afghanistan, and we've got to get forces home to spend some time, more time with their families, more than we've been able to do. So that's priority number 2. And then number 3 is the rest of the world. It's a big world out there. And I can talk about China, and I can talk about Russia and Georgia and all my friends in Europe. I can talk about what's going on in Latin America. We as Americans are not taught. I grew up in Southern California, not very far from Mexico. I was trained to look east and west, not north and south. We don't pay enough attention to what's going on north and south of us, and I think that's got to change. Huge economic engine in Latin America, in Brazil. Tremendous transformational change in Colombia. Colombia is a country that basically in the last 10 years has the leadership, President Uribe, and with the military, they've taken back a third of their country, which they didn't own. The terrorists owned that. The drug lords owned that. They've taken it back now. A lot of press tied to this hostage rescue, but the real story in Colombia is counterinsurgency, and there's a Colombian soldier that's losing his life every single day. There's a Colombian soldier that's another one that's getting their leg blown off every single day. I've been to their version of Walter Reed in terms of their rehab. But this is an incredible story. But a lot of it's moved to Mexico, and you just Google, Mexico deaths, assassinations, and the numbers are staggering there, and it's all tied to the drug trade. So we need to pay a lot of attention there. We talk about borders all over the world, and I can talk a lot about the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, although if you go there, nobody that lives there thinks there's a border. Okay? That's sort of the Western view versus the view of the tribes that live there. And we can talk a lot about that, and it's creating a big problem for us. We have our own challenge on our own border, and the problems are growing just south of us. I could spend a lot of time talking about places like Malaysia and Indonesia and the entirety of Africa and what's going on there, this wonderful continent that's resource rich, that has huge famine, that has disease challenges that we all need to, that I believe the international community needs to address, because they're all, those problems, those challenges are all headed our way. So what do we do from the military standpoint? And my only, I'll summarize quickly on that, is it's called engagement. It's called preventative, because I actually prefer to prevent a war, not fight one. And one of the ways you do this is you engage. And so you may have seen in the last few years humanitarian assistance with these big white hospital ships. We only had 2. I wish we had 10. The impact that they have, and it's not just military, because there are NGOs that have joined us. I'm very close to the director of Project Hope, which is a national and international organization that reaches out to poor places across the world. So we engage, and we, the United States and other nations as well, we are a resource-rich country, and part of that is I believe, is responsibility to reach out and positively impact in places in the world that are so much in need. And then lastly, I could talk about India, another absolute, when I focus on Afghanistan, it's pretty quick you get to Afghanistan and Pakistan. Not too long after that, you get to Afghanistan and Pakistan and India. And there have been challenges there for a long time. In the United States, we think of our history as 232 years. Okay, I go to these countries and we start talking about history, and it's, well, which century do you want to start talking about? Do you want to go back 500 years or 1,000 years or 2,000 years? And a lot of that is still current because it is passed on generation to generation. So there are many challenges. That's just kind of a quick quick summary of what my priorities are, a little bit about leadership, and I'll be glad to take your questions.